All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for hopping on this morning. We're going to give it a couple minutes for folks to log in, and then we'll get started here with Dr. Harrop. Thanks for joining. Hi, everybody. I see the numbers jumping, so welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're gonna get started here in about a minute or so. All right, the numbers stayed pretty steady. I'm thinking we can probably go ahead and get started. I'll pass it over to Dr. Magaña.
Hey, great. Welcome everybody to the Autism Consortium of Texas. And we have Dr. Clare Harrop with us today. And Dr. Harrop has been so gracious to come, over the last few years, and really it's really exciting to get updates in the research that she's doing on girls and boys, males and females. And so she's an associate professor in the Department of Health Sciences in the UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine. She's an investigator for both the Carolina Institute for Developmental Disabilities and the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute. Dr. Harrop is a developmental psychologist who specializes in the application of multimodal and multi-informant approaches to characterize developmental trajectories in autism, with a large focus on differences between autistic males and females. Her research uses robust longitudinal methods and spans early childhood through all the way through older adults. And her current research is funded through NICHD and NIMH, both NIH institutes and also private foundations. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Harrop.
Thank you. And I also like coming back here every year. It allows me to see how our work is going and how we are progressing in our research. So it's a nice time to reflect. Um, and also, if anything has changed, the UNC has rebranded. So I do have to have new slides. So that was a big change this year, having to change my slides. So today I'm going to present our work, which I broadly focus as adopting a lifespan lens to understand the needs and experiences of autistic females. I'm going to start with disclosures. I have the following funding from NIH, Organization for Autism Research, Autism Science Foundation, Eagles Autism Foundation, and also HRSA. And then I have some external positions. I think it's important to recognize that the views and opinions expressed during this presentation do not reflect the School of Social Work or the University of Texas. They also don't represent the funders that fund this work. So a brief roadmap for today. You'll see some of these pictures throughout. These are drawings that our participants do when they come to see us as part of our longitudinal study. And I'm going to talk to you today about diagnostic rates and the experiences of autistic females and their families. I'm also going to talk about reproductive health transitions in autism and how little we know. And then I'm going to talk about our longitudinal work and emerging data from those studies. So I am a developmental psychologist, and if anyone has ever heard me talk before, you would have seen this quote, that development itself is the key to understanding developmental disorders. Um, this really guides my research, and really, autism is a condition that evolves and changes over time, and as such, we need longitudinal methods to study autism both within and across developmental stages and those key transitions. So what you study in early childhood needs to evolve as we follow individuals through pertinent stages of development. So my work used to be pretty heavily centered in this kind of developmental trajectory from young childhood, toddlerhood, through to adolescence. And this was really important because there's increasing evidence that autism may present differently in females at different stages in development. And there could be subtle, often nuanced differences that contribute to delayed and misdiagnosis. So my work really situated this within development. And this is the lens that I take my work through. But it's also changed as I've gotten older and my samples have gotten older because development doesn't stop at 18. It really doesn't. There are stages that we go throughout life, and my work has evolved with that. So we have studies now that range from 4 years old to older adulthood, and really capturing some of those key transitions within development and over the lifespan. So focusing on diagnostic rates and experiences. This is to really situate this work within the broader context of autism. So autism is a historically male dominant diagnosis. And what I mean by that is that ever since we have heard about autism, it has been more common in males. So our original case reports of autism were from males, and we know that for many years females were not diagnosed. Currently, the sex ratios that currently 1 in 36 children are receive an autism diagnosis, and the sex ratio varies between 3.4 males to 1 female. We know that this has steadily reduced over time. So our CDC cohorts were 4.5 to 1 in 2012, and they've gone down steadily. And we see similar findings in Europe as well. But they also vary on the methods you use and on the samples you pull from. So there was a meta-analysis a few years ago which grouped data together and found that the sex ratio was closer to 3 to 1. There was a study a couple of years ago using infant sibling cohorts, and children that were classified in what they called the severe group had a sex ratio of 1 to 1. So this sex ratio depends on a lot of factors: language ability, co-occurring intellectual disability, and co-occurring conditions. We also know that females are more likely to be diagnosed later than males. This is again a very well replicated finding. And studies from the US and Europe consistently suggest that females are diagnosed between 18 and 24 months later. This is actually despite very few differences. If you go back and retrospectively ask these parents, what was going on in infancy and toddlerhood, there's very, very few differences. This age of diagnosis is even later for females who do not have a language delay. And we also know that females are more likely to be classified as late diagnosed, which I'm going to touch on later, but typically refers to receiving a diagnosis later in childhood or even in adolescence and adulthood. We also know that autism is more likely to be females are more likely to be misdiagnosed. Females are more likely to experience diagnostic overshadowing, and this is when a previous diagnosis or co-occurring diagnosis overshadows a clinician's judgment. And so if you have someone enter your clinic that has a diagnosis of ADHD, you may be less willing to consider autism, and you might explain those challenges away through this existing diagnosis. We also know that females are more likely to drop prior diagnosis. So I describe this as males seem to be able to pick up and collect different diagnoses, but females seem to have to drop a prior diagnosis to get that autism one. This is an old, this is a 15-year-old, nearly actually 20-year-old reference, but males were more likely to be referred for an autism evaluation. I'd be really interested to see if that still holds. And clinicians report feeling less confident diagnosing autism. And this is steadily shifted. We actually just wrote a review that included some of this, that clinicians are more open to to maybe using different thresholds, not relying solely on just parent report. They may go and get teacher report, and really trying to kind of open up their diagnostic processes to include more females. It's important to note that with delayed or misdiagnosis comes later support for autistic females or supports that may not be appropriate. And we really don't have really any evidence on intervention for females, which is a question I get asked a lot. So there's also a number of factors that contribute to delayed, missed, or misdiagnosis. A few recent reviews have looked at these, and they identified factors such as females using compensatory behaviors, what we think of as camouflaging or masking, perceptions of others, gender characteristics. So thinking about how all this comes together, with autism being historically considered as a male diagnosis, this may continue to cloud both clinician and parent judgment. And there's differences in the phenotypic presentation of autism in females that I will discuss that may contribute to this missed or delayed diagnosis. And so a few years ago, we had the opportunity as part of a K award that I had, a career development award, to look at a UNC Teach autism data set. And this has one resulting publication that I'm going to go into, but we also are looking into this on a range of other questions as well that I'm going to talk about. So my question with this data set was, are more females being diagnosed over time? Has the age of diagnosis lowered for females relative to males? Are we seeing a greater reduction? And have the numbers of late diagnosed females increased? So data for this study was drawn from diagnostic evaluations conducted at our state outpatient clinics. So the UNC Teach autism program has been serving North Carolina since the 70s, and there are currently 7 clinics across the state of North Carolina, and they serve both urban and rural communities. What's important to note is that this covers our whole state. So all 100 counties are in catchment to a Teach center. And participants were included in our database if they were evaluated and diagnosed with autism based on the DSM criteria in place at the time of their evaluation, and if they consented to have their data included in our database for research purposes. So we looked at data from January 2000 to December 2021, so just over 20 years of data. And what we find is that we had about 10,000 individuals, and we had kind of the classic sex ratio here in terms of our sample. So we had just under 20% females. We also see that age of diagnosis, even without running any stats, there is a difference. This is age in months. So our females here are coming out around 9.5, and I think our males are around 8, which is still quite late. And actually, it was really interesting getting the reviews for this paper back. Someone was clearly from Europe and someone was from the US. And the US, what we think of as the US reviewer, said, well, this is still very late in terms of age of diagnoses. And the European reviewer said, oh, this is pretty early still. And it's important to note that our age range is really wide. We have 18 months through to someone in their 70s. So Teach does take people over the lifespan, which allows us to look at this data in a way that isn't possible with many large data sets. So our first question was, are more females being diagnosed over time? And the great finding here to take away is that yes, we are seeing more females over time. So our ratio has decreased over time from 5.6 to around 3. So coming out around where that meta-analysis here. And we're seeing that this isn't driven by more males and more females. It is really driven by the more females are coming into our clinics and receiving a diagnosis. What we don't find is the age of diagnosis is going down. We are not seeing a shift. So again, our males are getting diagnosed around the age of 8 and our females around 9.5. And regardless of when you were seen, whether it was 2000 or 2021, if you were female, you were always having a later age of diagnosis. We also see that late diagnosis is going up over time. Late diagnosis we defined in this sample as age 13. And we picked that because that is the age where you are reevaluated in North Carolina for school-based services. So you have some children that will stay at elementary school a little bit longer, and they really have aged out of those kind of childhood services. And there's a lot of debate as to what late diagnosis is, and I will touch on that in a few slides. What we find is that being female is associated with a greater odds of being late diagnosed. And over time, over the course of the data set, late diagnosis is going up. And it is going up more in females. So this is really interesting, and I think it really does reflect what we're seeing in society as a whole. So we've also taken this data, it was just submitted this week, to take this huge data set and to really understand heterogeneity in autism. So that kind of saying, that once you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person. Taking all of this data together to try and find meaningful groups of individuals. So not only were we interested in when people were diagnosed, but who is getting diagnosed. And our database includes a lot of information. And we are particularly interested in race, ethnicity, IQ, adaptive behavior, and autism severity. So instead of focusing on group differences, so are males and females different, we've adopted what we call a data-driven approach to look at profiles. And what I mean by a data-driven approach is basically we stick all the data into a model. We're using latent profile analysis here, and it sorts the data based on similarities in these variables that we have deemed important. So in this data set, we find 4 profiles. And to talk you through these, our first one, our profile 1, is children who are mostly young. The average age of diagnosis is 4, and we see a range from 1.5 to 6. And this group is characterized by moderate intellectual disability, low adaptive behaviors, and high autism characteristics. And this is just under 10% of our sample. If we contrast that to profile 2, this is where all of our adults ended up. They have, skip forward one. They are around 21, about the age of their diagnosis, but we see a range of 3.5 years to 68 years. So while some kids get in there, the majority, 60% of this sample is 18 plus. Again, we have low IQ, low adaptive behaviors, and mild autism characteristics. Our third profile is mostly toddlers and preschoolers, age 3 at diagnosis, with mild ID, moderate autism characteristics, and low adaptive behavior. And then the majority of our sample, over half, fall into individuals that were around 8 years when they were diagnosed, and they're anywhere between 18 months and just under 18 when they get diagnosed. The majority in kind of elementary school age, and they have average IQ, low adaptive behavior, and mild autism characteristics. And this actually has led me to really think about adaptive behavior, because this is really common across all the profiles, regardless of IQ and autism characteristics. They were all characterized by low adaptive behavior. And then we had, sorry, I'm just seeing if there was, I'm going to respond to questions after, just to make sure I'm following. So then our second question was, do these profiles differ by race, sex, and ethnicity? And for 3 of the profiles, no, they were pretty equal. But this second profile, which is what we think of as our adult profile, we see more females in this sample, and we see more white individuals. And so I think this data set is telling us that we know that more females are coming in during adulthood for diagnosis, but there also may be some differences by race as well, with who is accessing an adult diagnosis. We are also using this data set to look at the co-occurrence of ADHD. We just had a grant funded last year, and we're working on some publications from that. But as I mentioned, there is some discussion around what is late diagnosis. And if this was a kind of an interactive seminar, I'd be asking you, what do you think late diagnosis is and why? Why did you pick that? And we published a paper last year in the Journal of Autism Research that was a review of late diagnosis in autism. And this was actually because I was writing the response to the review of our teach paper that I just presented as to justification as to why we picked 13 as late diagnosis. And there really wasn't anything. So I spoke, this is Tyler McFadden was a postdoc in my lab, and Sunny Russell is a third year graduate student. And I came in one morning, I was like, I think we should review this. Like, I think this is really important. And this was actually one of the most cited, top 10 cited papers for autism research last year. So I think this is a really important topic. Um, and so despite increases in diagnosis of autism, we know that the age of diagnosis remains around 5. I think one of the comments was around CDC. But there are variations by race, ethnicity, sex, gender, and also country. Um, we know that receiving an autism diagnosis is associated with greater improvement across a range of domains, and it is also important for self-identity, a sense of belonging. And for many, many years, the field has focused on early detection, diagnosis, and intervention, but there is this growing number of individuals diagnosed later, broadly termed late diagnosed. But there was no consensus as to what that was. So the goal of this review was to evaluate the field's cutoffs for late diagnosis, what people state as their justification, and determine how they vary maybe as a function of demographic or population factors, and to look at trends over time. So this was a registered systematic review, and we extracted 420 studies. These were nearly half were from North America. We had a large number from Europe, and then a smaller number from Asia, Australia, South America, and then a combination of countries. What's really interesting is that studies spanned 35 years in terms of their publication, but only just over a third provided what we termed a clear threshold for late diagnosis. So that is, the authors said we described late or missed diagnosis as. Very few, actually, a third basically did this. And the average cutoff was around 11 and a half years. But we see this huge range of 2 years to 55, with a median of 6.5. But actually, when we look at the distribution of the data, we see a bimodal distribution. So we have one distribution, one peak at around 5 years and one peak at around 18. So this average doesn't really reflect what we're seeing when we look at the data. So most studies that defined late diagnosis actually only included clinically diagnosed individuals. 46 papers actively recruited late diagnosed individuals. And the sex ratio or gender ratio was much smaller in these late diagnosed samples. So it was around 2.29 to 1 when we're looking at late diagnosed individuals. These figures here, the first one just shows like how many papers, and you can see there is just this increase from really 2015 of papers, and then 2024 there was nearly 80 papers with late diagnosis. And also you see the threshold for late diagnosis increasing over time. So it was rare in the early 2000s to have anything above kind of 5 or 6, whereas this is going up steadily over time. When authors provided a justification, these were grouped into 2 overarching themes, which were later than what is possible and later than what is optimal, and then further divided using 4 rationales. So the first was access to early intervention. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The second was quantifying late diagnosis using data-driven approach. And this is basically researchers taking the mean or a median and splitting their data into early or late. So a study by Rataz and colleagues in 2022 grouped people into early, below 3, average, 3 to 6, or late, plus 7. The third rationale was based on eligibility for accessing medical or educational services. Um, Davidich, 2015, this is a group out of Israel, said, say age 6 was the cutoff for late diagnosis due to change in eligibility status for medical care and the start of school-related services internationally. They also, the same group had a paper in 2023 where they stated there is no established criteria for defining late diagnosis in autism. In the Israeli context, where healthcare is easily accessible at the community level and where children are seen and evaluated by their healthcare team through age 6 for developmental delays, we define children who manage to get through age 6 without raising any suspicions of autism as late diagnosed. Um, so this was like a really clear definition, which was missing from many. And then we just had the onset of adulthood. So just becoming an adult. So Lapindo and colleagues in 2022 said for the purpose of this study, the terms delayed or late diagnosis will be used interchangeably to refer to adult diagnosis of autism that occurs after the legal age of 18 in South Africa. So they base that really on just when you become an adult. So this has been really interesting for us. Our team is associated with a large NIH-funded network that is focused on late diagnosis. So we've been really excited to kind of learn, like, use what we've learned in this review to inform that network as well. So our team has been really interested in looking at diagnostic pathways and how they may vary. When we're thinking of diagnosis, autism might not be the first diagnosis we think of for females. We know that camouflaging may delay diagnosis. There may be conflicts between a traditional feminine identity, what we think of as girl typical interests, and what we think of as autism. And there are many detours, opportunities, and roadblocks, such as initial mental health diagnosis, male biases, and the availability and affordability of services. And this is a really great review by a colleague, Ming-Xuan Lau, who really, instead of kind of thinking of a female phenotype of autism, our teams have been really taking what we think of as the DSM criteria, and this paper really beautifully goes through that DSM criteria point by point and provides examples of how this may present in females or gender diverse individuals. And I think this is just a really great example for clinicians. This is an example from our longitudinal study. This is an 8-year-old female. She came into our study with a suspicion of autism, and we saw her as 4 time points as part of our longitudinal study that I'll discuss later. Her interests were Minecraft, art, and Harry Potter. I have a 7-year-old who loves Harry Potter, so these are all what we think of as very quote unquote neurotypical. So at her first assessment, she did ADOS Module 3, and she scored above cutoff for that. This is not severity score. I think this is total. I would have to check. If it was the calibrated severity score, I think we might have a different discussion. Her SRS was in the normal range. This is a parent report measure. She had a really high IQ on the DOS. Her language was good on the self. Her Vineland was kind of fine. There was some mild elevation on the brief, which looks at executive functioning. But all of her CBCL scores, which look at sorry, I'm losing my words here. Internalizing and externalizing behaviors were all below our cutoff. At the time 2 assessment, which is 6 months later, her ADHD rating scale had gone up. This continued to go up at time 3. And when she came to us at T4, she had received an anxiety and depression diagnosis. School had been involved due to suicidal ideation, but she didn't get an ADHD diagnosis. Her ADOS total score had gone up. Her SRS had gone up. DOS and self, very, very, very much the same. Her Vineland had gone down. Her brief had gone up, and her CBCL had gone up. And so our team felt confident based on our clinical interview and all of this broad assessment that we that she received an autism diagnosis at time 4. And this was an example that social demands of school were just outweighing her social abilities, which were really quite strong at her first assessment. And I think this points to, we talk about in our team when we're doing these clinical reviews of these cases, is it one of the A's? Is it autism, anxiety, ADHD? Is it two of these? Is it three of these? Or is it something else? And we know that regardless of sex, a timely autism diagnosis is challenged by the presence of co-occurring conditions. In adults, females are more likely to have their autism diagnosis missed and be misdiagnosed. Prior ADHD diagnosis delays an autism diagnosis more for females than it does for males. Um, in a recent study, females reported just more perceived misdiagnoses. And there's just this general discussion about autism and ADHD combined that I think has really risen, particularly among females. So this is a project, we were really interested in these pathways to a diagnosis. This was, again, part of my pivot due to COVID K award. And this was work led by myself, but also my graduate student, Sunny. It's just been submitted for publication. And we were really interested in how you get from that initial concern to a diagnosis. And we were particularly interested in not just females, but females who were members of other minoritized groups, because there is little known about intersecting identities and its impact on diagnosis. So the goal was to identify challenges, roadblocks, and barriers that parents have experienced when obtaining an autism diagnosis, and how these relate to care, and how these challenges they perceive as impacted by identity. So our participants were recruited through Spark Research Match. We over-recruited for caregivers of children who were a racial and ethnic minority and who were females. So we had just under 160 participants. Majority were parents of females. And then we had a pretty broad mix of races, smaller percentage of Hispanic and Latino, but much bigger than our longitudinal studies that are going on right now. This is a pretty high income group, which is pretty common with Spark. And most of our respondents were mothers. They were also highly educated. And our survey, this was a mixed method study, and I'm going to present here on the survey, but we also did in-depth qualitative interviews, which we are just analyzing. So we had demographic questions. We also just asked parents to describe your diagnostic journey. And we looked at timing and experience of key touch points. And these could be things such as other diagnosis, speaking to professionals, referrals. We estimated we got parents to estimate the latency. So when you first had concerns, how long did it take? And what were the barriers and catalysts to the process? We asked parents to reflect on what would you change, what would you have done differently, and what would you like the team to know? So what we find here is that the age of diagnosis was around 4 years. So what we're seeing at the kind of CDC national level, there was no significant difference by sex for age of diagnosis. But we can see here there is a much wider range for females. And we also don't see a difference for age of wondering. So when you first started to think, when you started to think something was different in your child's development, but again, a much larger range. In the females only, the current child age was related to the number of previous diagnoses. So if you were entering our study later, you had several prior diagnoses. And this may be an indicator of diagnostic overshadowing that I mentioned. When looking at intersectional identities, non-white females were significantly more likely than non-white males to receive a diagnosis prior than the autism classification. Because our sample was quite small, we grouped together our non-white identities, and I'm aware that that is not great because it washes out key differences between the group, but we weren't powered to look at these groups individually. White females were more likely to be told than white males that they may grow out of their behaviors. And non-white females were more likely to be told that it was too early to make a judgment. When we look at prior diagnosis, the most common for males and females was speech delay. But we do see a difference between males and females, with males having more externalizing. When we break this up by race, we see this is really more common in our non-white males, which replicates what we see in the literature. And for internalizing, we see that females are more likely to have internalizing. And again, this is really doesn't seem very common in our non-white males, again, in line with prior literature. When we did our analysis looking at what predicted age of diagnosis, each prior diagnosis increased the final age of diagnosis by 9 months. So this, I can't take credit for these animations, but if our average age of diagnosis was around the age of 4, if you had one prior diagnosis, it shifted your age of diagnosis up by nearly a year. I mean, 10 months is a pretty long time. And each diagnosis was associated with a latency increase. So if your average latency is around 2.3 years from when you first wondered to when you got that diagnosis, if you add a diagnosis to that, it increases that. And then with other diagnosis, you also get what we call more turning points. This is just things that happened along the way that you thought as a parent were significant. So in other words, this is our average age of diagnosis. If you were expected to have had at least about 2.5 interactions or turning points with providers. But if you added additional diagnosis to that, you just got a lot more. So you're just having more contact. And actually just reviewed a student poster yesterday, and it was talking about parents' frustration with accessing services. And I was like, well, if you're just being the helpfulness of services and how parents whose kids were diagnosed later were more frustrated. Well, if you're being told different things at different times, you're going to get more frustrated. So at thematic analysis, you may have noticed this slide. This is milkweed, and a mum mentioned at the end of the interview that her child was focused on had an interest in botany, and during the butterfly unit, this had been a focus, and it resonated with her as she called her daughter quietly essential. She's often overlooked, which urges her to advocate, and it connected as a metaphor for our team and kind of this beauty of milkweed. It is needed so that monarch butterflies can thrive. So there was a lot of discussion about advocacy being something they had to do, and the emotional cost of that, but how it also helped them grow while being exhausting, being dismissed. And I'm going to, in the purpose of time, I'm going to skip through these because I want to make sure I get to other sections. Here is a quote from a parent. What would you want us to know? Racism is here. Adoption complicates diagnoses. Girls are dismissed. Sorry, that's 3. What would you like us to know? She's a gift. Some things are difficult, but she's extraordinary. Some things are extraordinary. She amazes me every day. I want you to know that you're not alone. The diagnosis can be frustrating and overwhelming, but there are resources and support system available. So what our results told us is that age of diagnosis may not be the whole story. Females are getting more diagnosis and it's increasing their time. And they seem to accumulate more diagnosis than males. And this may be particularly salient for females of color. So I'm going to completely switch gears to talk about reproductive health transitions. And this was something that started because of, I gave a talk actually at a conference with Dr. Magaña. And an autistic woman came up to me and she said, have you ever studied perimenopause? And I said, I had not, but let's carry on chatting. And this whole body of work that I'm going to present you is due to that one conversation. So what we know about reproductive health transitions in autism, specifically focusing on females, is there's just not been much because there's some uniquely female experiences that have been neglected in autism research because we don't really have that many females. But there is increasing evidence that reproductive transitions are challenging. So we know that in puberty, there is potentially earlier onset of puberty and it could be faster, the tempo, and there's cyclic amplification of autism characteristics. Pregnancy. I we there are very small studies suggesting heightened sensory experiences, higher rates of complications, and just being not satisfied by healthcare. And then in perimenopause, we again see some of these challenges, heightened sensory experiences, higher rate of menopausal complaints, exacerbated mental health challenges. So this is the area that our work is focused on. So menopause is defined as the point when a woman has not had a menstrual period for 12 months, and this signifies the end of menstruation and fertility, and it typically occurs between 45 and 55. Perimenopause, on the other hand, is that transitional period leading up to that, and it can last several years, and it is marked by lots of things, and it often starts in your 40s. So why do we want to study this? Well, there's only been 8 studies of this in autism, and they really indicate that existing challenges are amplified and mental health really suffers. Most of these studies have been retrospective. So they're women who have gone through perimenopause, they are menopausal, and we're really reflecting back. One study described this period as when my autism broke. Um, there have been also very small studies. There's been 2 recent larger studies with quantitative data sets that have found a lack of support and a lack of relevant information for autistic women. Um, and another study found that autistic women had higher psychological and somatic complaints. And so this study is funded by the Organization for Autism Research. It has been led by myself, my graduate student Mags, and another graduate student Monica. And it really is a team effort. And we have a 3-phase study. We are just entering phase 3. I'm going to talk to you just today about the online survey where we focused on perimenopause symptoms, healthcare support and access, mental health, and other related behaviors. We've just completed 20 interviews that we are going to be starting the thematic analysis for, and then we're doing daily diaries in a subset of women. So the online survey looked at perimenopause symptoms. We had measures of anxiety, depression, sleep, cognitive function, autism characteristics, and demographics, and then a measure that we created looking at their experiences with perimenopause and healthcare access and their mental health. We had 104 women who were between age 44 and 55. What is really interesting is that literature suggests that perimenopause starts around 45. We see a much wider range here. And I think that's really important for our studies that we are seeing this happening earlier. I don't know how that translates to non-autistic samples, but I'm pretty sure it's a bit earlier. It's a predominantly white sample. They're very highly insured, but we do have quite a lot of distribution in income. And in fact, doing some of these interviews, many of the women just couldn't work because things had gotten so challenging during this period for them. We have really high rates. These are percentages of co-occurring mental health challenges, and over 40% of our sample had a prior reproductive health condition as well. So what we find is, unsurprisingly, menopause symptoms are high. So red here indicates this is high. And that you'd expect that. These women are in perimenopause as we're asking them. But in terms of their general quality of life, we see a slight elevation for anxiety, but cognitive function is good, life function is good. And this is really promising to see because we know that brain fog is really common during perimenopause. So maybe this is slightly different. Access to medical care. Again, this was pretty highly insured. Nearly 80% of our women in the sample had access to a primary care physician, which is actually really high. We know that there is data suggesting that autistic individuals are less likely to have their routine medical needs met. So this was really encouraging. But less than 40% of these were actually accessing specialist care through an OBGYN. Just under half of the sample had made lifestyle changes. So these are things like diet, exercise, supplements. And in terms of medical treatment, about a third were currently having these. And these are a variety of HRT. In their own words, we asked them what would have prepared them. It would be cool if there was a women's health group to support us through these stages. Short of that, a pamphlet would have been nice. And I think we can all Anyone who's a 40-odd-year-old woman or been here, a pamphlet would be nice. More education, there's lots of different information, and it doesn't always agree. Having individuals know what perimenopause is and how it affects autism and ADHD would be a big thing. And there's some of the literature we cite in this grant and in our paper that we're writing currently is that I think residents report getting one lecture on menopause and one lecture on autism. And you kind of put that together, and there's just no preparation. So our women wanted earlier information, more education for providers and from providers, and more openness. There was some discussion about, I didn't know about this because my mom just didn't talk about it. And I think that's really interesting. So taking it all back to that kind of first quote that I oriented our work in, a lot of work looking at sex differences has been retrospective or one time point. And I think what I have tried to do, and I hope to do, is take all of this and do this longitudinally. Um, so this is a kind of a schematic of sex differences across childhood and adolescence. So really, when we look at early childhood, we see females have more complex play behaviors. They have fewer or different repetitive behaviors. Their interests may be more what we think of as gender typical. They seem more socially motivated. But as they get older, we see that these advantages potentially in early childhood start to slip. So we see potentially higher suicidality. We see increased risk for victimization, greater internalizing symptoms. So we are really trying to situate our work to look at this over time. And to do this, we have a sample of children, it's around 300 kids, equally split by diagnosis. And then within that, males and females. We have about, I think, 10% gender diverse individuals in the sample as well. And this is the SAGA study, the Sex and Gender and Autism study. This is a collaboration from UNC, CHOP, and Children's National. And we're really focusing on this first part here, so this early childhood. Kids are 4 to 8 when they come into the study, and we follow them up over time for about 18 months. And we use different approaches. We use eye tracking, we use standard assessments, we use interactions with their parents, and we have some measures that we've created as a team. So our eye tracking, these are all published paradigms that we've used. We have the parent and child play together. We ask the child about their gender development. We do a brief getting to know you interaction. We have a friendship interview, and we have a lot of parent report, and then we have some clinical assessments. And this is how the kids are followed up over time. So they're in these cohorts, and we just follow them up every 6 months. So they overlap. And we've been able to use this sample to understand other things in autism as well. So I have some colleagues who are really interested in challenging eating behaviors. We know these are really common in autism. And so we have families in the study can opt into an additional study where we are looking at challenging eating behaviors by diagnosis and sex using a multimodal approach. And then we've also been fortunate to combine our data with that of others. So this is a grant that we got just over a year ago that combined our data from the SAGA cohort with 3 other cohorts. And so we had this sample of over 1,200 individuals, and we were looking at eating behaviors and how these vary by sex, age, and diagnosis because the sample spans 3 to 39 years. And so I'm going to finish off kind of quickly. I'm just aware of the time with some emerging findings and where we're going. So I'm really fortunate. One of my long-term collaborators is Julia Parrish Morris at CHOP, and she has been looking at the emergence of camouflaging behaviors through audio tapes and looking at how individuals use their language and how that may differ by sex and diagnosis. And our team has developed a conversation protocol where we introduce a special interest topic. And we are using the transcripts and videos for various coding. And in the For time, I won't show these videos, but in this this little boy is talking about his interest in trains, and it's just really clear he's so excited about it. We also have eye tracking paradigms, which we published on prior to this study that found really robust sex differences, and we're looking at how they emerge over time. Postdoc in the lab has used that data to look at what we call scan path trajectories. So instead of just like where you looking for how long, what is your scan path? How does your attention change over the course of, in this case, a video? And what we find is that autistic males had a more atypical scan path, and our autistic females really don't. They look very similar to our non-autistic males. What we are finding in our sample, which is not surprising, but seeing this early on, is that in this sample, these are 4 to 8, our autistic females have steeper anxiety and depression trajectories. So these are our females here. These are our autistic females in blue. Their anxiety and depression is going up much more over time than non-autistic children, but also autistic males. And that is predicted by emotional control from the brief. In some really novel work led by my graduate student, Maya Kopinski, she has been using what we call the Van Meter Index, which is 2 items taken from a parent report measure that talk about deliberately harm self or attempt suicide, and talks about killing themselves. Again, this is a young sample, but what we find here is that our autistic group endorse this more. And as you can see here, this seems to be more common in females. So we have, trying to do the sums in my head, 11 autistic youth, and of those, 7 are females that are endorsing, that their parents are endorsing this. When we break this up further, we see that we have, this is not by sex. Self-harm, we see self-harm or attempt in 4. We see suicidal ideation in 3 of our autistic youth, and then we see both in 4. And what Maya has done is looked at the profiles of these kids relative to our wider sample, and we see higher rates of anxiety and ADHD. We also see a parent history of internalizing disorders and self-harm. We see challenges with emotional regulation, difficulties with change, social challenges, and then clinically elevated depression, externalizing and internalizing. So this is work that she is following up over time as part of her master's thesis to look at how these profiles change. We've also, in work not funded by NIH, worked with John Strang, who is a wonderful collaborator at Children's National, to look at the development of gender in this young group. And our team just submitted 5 abstracts to, in fact, they were accepted for a panel at SRCD, which is focused on sexual orientation and gender identity in children and adolescents this summer. And this is a scale that our teams use where kids place stickers or use markers to indicate how they feel. And what they want to be when they're older. And what we're finding is that this is really accessible for kids, and also that we are seeing greater gender diversity in our young autistic children. And then we want to, in keeping with this development is key, we have actually this, we've got 2 proposals that have scored relatively well with NIH. We want to follow these individuals up to understand their mental health and well-being, how their friendships and their family support and their community support impact their development, but also understand puberty and hormones in this stage. So this would be when kids are between 8 and 13. And so in that study, we are proposing to look at pubertal development, as well as hormones, anxiety, depression, suicidality. And then we just got a score back on another proposal where we take what we've done but really make it more realistic. And so instead of just interacting with us, we want to pair autistic youth with no other autistic youth in our sample, or autistic and non-autistic youth, and to see actually how they interact together. And during those interactions, collect measures of anxiety and attention. Um, so really expanding this social development to more to more ecologically valid. So we have these different tasks where they'd interact with the examiner, they'd interact with their parent, but they'd also interact with a sex and age matched peer. So thank you. And I always that was a little whistle stop tour, and it's always as I add more to these presentations, I realize I need to take things out. Um, so really just to end with this, again, this quote that development itself is the key to understanding developmental disorders. And I think our work has really tried to situate development within these contexts. And so a big thank you to this is my current lab members and all our former members who really keep this going and our community partners and my collaborators and mostly our participants who really give up so much time and energy for our studies. So thank you. I
Yeah.
will stop sharing my screen now.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. That was really great. It's always great to get an update and love to see that longitudinal study continue with the kiddos. So, and glad you got a good score on that. Yeah, so there are some questions in chat. One that says, how does your data on age at diagnosis fit with the latest CDC data, saying median age is around 47 months?
Yeah. I think the profile analysis that we've just submitted for publication, one of those, in fact, two of those profiles are kind of similar. One is around age 3 and one is around age 4, and that is about 60% of our sample. So I think the CDC data, it's important to know that they're not adults. You know, these are child samples, whereas our teach data set really does span the age range. So you are going to get more variability. But we are seeing in two of those profiles very similar ages.
Yeah, thank you. And Kimberly said that advocacy doesn't feel optional. It's essential, right?
Yeah.
And she's literally here for it, for this because she was interested in menopause and ADHD and autism.
Yeah, I describe that study as it's been like life-giving for me. I think when you run I run this big longitudinal study and these other studies, and I'm, I am involved day to day, but it's a very different role. Whereas this small pilot study on perimenopause, I was like, I want to do these interviews. I'm really interested. I'm 41 years old. I want to learn from these women. And it has been life-giving. It really has been. And it's just sort of reinvigorated, I think, when you're on this hamster wheel of research. It really has. And the women are so invested in it that it really has sparked like a very new direction for my lab, but one that we're very excited about.
Wonderful. That's great. There's a question in the Q&A that says, would be great to replicate the perimeno study with a more diverse group of women.
Yes, I agree. We do have a bit of gender diversity in there. We refer to them as women just because of terminology we put in the paper, and we just have a poster at a conference in a couple of weeks. Um, I agree. The Spark data set is wonderful. Using Spark Research Match is wonderful, but it is not the most ethnically and racially diverse sample. This is, to our knowledge, the first funded study of perimenopause in the US. So we're excited to get like we're working on the publication right now. But yes, we recognize that.
Great. Are there other questions? And feel free, I think, if you wanted to ask your question orally, Caroline could let you do that. Or if
I'm
you'd
also
like.
always happy to answer questions via email. I know I've kind of run right to the time.
No, no, it's fine because we usually allow an hour and a half. So
Okay, good. Oh, I could have gone slower.
you could have gone. Sorry
I
about
thought I was finishing at one. One
that.
my time. Oh, I could go back and show you videos. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I
Um,
apologize. I came straight from another meeting this morning reviewing
yeah.
grants. So I could have had time. I'm happy to show videos.
Yeah, Kathy said yes, please do.
I flipped through. Oh, sorry. I can share our videos. Let me do that.
Okay.
Um, and it's I think this is just a really I think it just shows this kiddo. Let me go back. Um, this was I hope it's shared for sound and let me know if it's not.
Okay.
Um, but this little boy here is talking about
Okay, so I believe that you really like trains.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. So you play trains with your baby brother, right? Yeah. And can you tell me more about this train set that you have at home? Okay, it comes with wooden tracks and wooden trains. I don't have it much right now, but I use a different engine that don't belong to it. I got I bought two more, and the fourth one I had of them was Express. Oh. And then it was Norfolk Southern, and this other one. I don't know. But the wooden ones I can shoot for in any company because they don't say anything. They don't say anything? Yeah. Oh.
and this is him just talking about his sister and cats. And I can tell you this was my graduate student. This is Orla, one of my graduate students. She actually is a postdoc now at Boston. I can talk a little bit about her findings.
It's fun to just stay here. Do you have any pets at home? Yes. Ooh. Can you tell me about your pets? When my baby came into the room, the laundry room, little cat in his little box and his water in that, he grabbed the pellets out of the food, like put it in the water thing in the food bowl, and the cat ate it. Really? Yeah. That's so funny. Oh, cats are so funny. It's fun to just say.
Oh, so what we're doing with those videos, we're like looking at them for differences between how autistic and non-autistic, but also males and female children talk about their interests and just a very varying social communication. So even though this is a little boy, when he's talking about his interest in trains, he like physically shifts his body. He's making more eye contact. He's using his hands more. Um, and what Orla found in her dissertation was that when you talk about something that's really exciting to you, regardless of what that is, your intonation, your prosody, how you use language, just it is different. It's more kind of vibrant, I guess, in how you talk. And we also see that individuals just talk more. They're just excited to be able to talk about something that's not just generic. So we've been doing that, that she's getting that ready for publication. Um, and I always like this example of this little boy because he just really loves his trains. And his sister playing with cats. But yeah, I am happy to take any other questions. I'm sorry I messed up on time. I could have presented so much more.
That's okay. We do have one other question in the Q&A. So we have a question from Katie. Do you think your perimenopause/menopause study will lead to better screening and diagnosis for women who may not have an autism diagnosis yet?
So it's really interesting. I don't know whether that will be a direct consequence, but the average age of diagnosis for women in our perimenopause study is, I think, 43 years old. So these are women who are getting diagnosed as they're entering perimenopause, basically. And I think the description from a prior study of this is when my autism broke is really telling. In fact, in our sample of over 100 women, only 5 were diagnosed before the age of 18. So that's really telling. And I think some of the qualitative work from doing the interviews is like this sense of like, we know that masking is more common in autistic women. We we know like it almost it gets to a point where they've coped for so long and then it's like the mask slips. They just can't do it anymore with everything that's going on. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is a lot of these women are in what we think of as the sandwich generation. They may have caregiving responsibilities for children, and also they have aging parents as well. So you've just got, you're kind of in this pressure cooker. Um, and I think a lot of the women we spoke to, they just, everything just fell apart. Like women saying they just couldn't work during this time. So I don't know if it will lead to screening, but our hope is that I mean, I think there's two hopes, right? That we can inform care for autistic women during this period. And I think care in general, I think we can all acknowledge that women's healthcare is not optimal, um, but particularly for this group of women, but also maybe some awareness of, okay, you seem to be doing really well up until this point. Um, and like what may be going on. And I think that that takes a lot of integration across systems as well, that maybe, you know, you may go and see your PCP or your gynecologist that may not have that on their radar. Very few women spoke of having like a nurse practitioner, but there were some that had amazing experiences and providers that treated them as a partner in their care and considered autism and neurodiversity, but others that just did not.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for your response. We have a follow-up from Katie who just asked that question, asking, have you looked at how many of these women in the study have autistic children?
We have not. We do know if they've got. Actually, I'm not gonna confirm that we don't have that data. I know that we have data if they have children.
Mm.
I don't know if we have whether they're t children are autistic. I can say from some of the interviews that women have shared, you know, my kids are autistic, so I at some point I just was like, I think this might be more than just regular. Like they were really struggling and they're like, I think this may be autism interacting with perimenopause or life stresses. Um, so we haven't, but that's a really good point. That's yeah, very important.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, for your questions. We have one from Stephanie. Stephanie says, it looked like the common early diagnosis was speech delay. Did you find that most gained speech over time or had speech when diagnosed as adult?
So I
As an
think
adult?
I think that's from the Pathways study where we looked at prior diagnoses. We didn't follow that cohort up over time. So I actually don't know if that if they gained. I mean, I think we know around 20 to 30% of autistic individuals do not gain fluent speech, have not do not have speech by the time they enter school. Um, so I don't know actually in that sample. I'm curious in our longitudinal sample, we have around 20% of our autistic group are what we think of as minimally speaking. And we have seen some really nice growth in those kids over time. Um, so yeah, I actually don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for your question and Dr. Harrop for your response. Again, if there are more questions out there, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. Either works.
Yeah, and I think Kimberly wanted to get in touch, so I don't know what the best way to do that would be.
Yes.
I'm easy to find online.
You are. Yes.
Okay,
You
good.
can find me easy. But I think it's very refreshing to see like having a you know, it's really good to have open and frank dis one of the things that came out in our regarding the perimenopause study was just how the sort of stigma around this period of time, particularly generational and like parents, like mothers not talking about it and um how that hasn't helped. And I think sort of that stigma as well.
Yep. All right. Any other questions? Oh.
I could have easily had another 30 minutes of
Yeah, sorry, we didn't
no,
clarify
it's
that.
my fault. I just in my head I was like, it's an hour. I could
Yeah.
have talked for I was cutting slides last night. I could have added
Yeah.
so many back in.
No, and it's usually like 45 minutes to an hour of the talk and then discussion, however long that lasts, up till a half an hour or 1:30 or 12:30,
I'm
whatever
always
time it
happy to
is.
answer questions via email. And yeah, a lot of this work is kind of forthcoming. So if you have me back next year, I'll have tons to speak about because we're working on a lot of these publications now.
We
And
definitely will then.
it's really the longitudinal data is so exciting.
Yeah.
Um, and also some of it cross-sectionally is really interesting that we're not finding some of the things we expected. Which
Mhm.
you think, you always say in your grant proposal, we'll have a bigger sample, so we'll find stronger effects, and we may not be finding those effects. So that's
Mhm.
interesting as well. Like, is there
It
something
is.
about this sample? So,
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
thank you.
You.
Thank you so much.
And
Enjoy
we'll
your
be in touch.
weekend. Okay.
You
Oh, thank
too.
you as well.
Bye. Bye. Thanks,
Bye
Caroline.
bye.
Bye. Do you need me to
Oh,
see?
and then I will just make, sorry, a quick announcement. I have written down right here, but a little brain fog. If you would like CEU, if in your registration you mentioned wanting a CEU, I'll be in touch with you in the next week or so. And then please take our survey as well, which you will automatically get when you log out. All right, thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.